Welcome back to the second part of our merchants tutorials. Last time we made this script here, checking that we have enough money for our weapon to purchase, also checking that we don't already own the weapon, as well as setting up events that we will fill out later down here, and then also subtracting that currency. What we didn't do was populate the weapon inside of our character because there's two things we need to check for. So let's start there today. For those of you starting fresh, this is inside user interface folder under shop_weapons. Let's grab our hero reference, get weapon slot 1. Then I'm going to copy that hero reference again, get weapon slot 2. So with these, what we need to do is drag out another exclamation mark to check that we are not equal. Copy that over, and we will also need to check again that we're not equal with weapon slot 2, but we're not going to put an and here as we did over here. Click the drop down, type in base weapon, because remember that weapon base is essentially our version of not having a weapon equipped. So in a scenario where we don't have a weapon equipped in a slot, we need to make sure we populate that slot rather than replacing the weapon in the already populated slot. So if weapon slot 1 had a weapon and weapon slot 2 didn't have a weapon, then we'd put the new weapon in weapon slot 2 and vice versa. So we'll start by checking weapon slot 1, grab a branch, and then we'll also check weapon slot 2, grabbing another branch, holding B and clicking anywhere to get that branch. So if weapon slot 1 isn't equal to weapon base, then we'll check weapon slot 2. If weapon slot 2 isn't equal to weapon base, that's when we'll decide which one of these weapons to replace, and that will come in a moment. But let's work on the script for if we just need to replace our weapon base or our no weapon slot. So starting out of the false of our first branch connected to weapon slot 1, let's get another hero reference and set weapon slot 1, which is the first thing we'd need to do here, which is set the class, because we use the class to determine or essentially save what weapon we have to switch between those two classes for the equipped weapon. So dragging out of false. So in this case, we would change it to the assault rifle because this is the assault rifle script. And then as you can imagine, the first step for our next branch is set weapon slot 2. Getting assault rifle there again. And if both slots are fulfilled, then we will do another script here out of true. Next up, let's get another hero reference, and we need to change our equipped weapon if that is the slot that is equipped. Let's get equipped weapon down the bottom here. And then with that, we can set child actor class, which is, if you remember, the same thing we do, the same node we use when we are changing our weapons between weapon slot 1 and weapon slot 2. We need 1 per weapon slot because we have 2 different scenarios here. So we'll copy that over and paste it down, and we will change that to the assault rifle as well. For both. So that will actually put the assault rifle in our hand if we have that slot equipped. Now to determine whether we have that slot equipped, let's grab another hero reference. With this hero reference, let's get weapon slot. This is the boolean that we use to determine which weapon slot we're using. Make a little bit more room here. We'll need a branch for each of them. We'll copy that over, paste it again. However, the difference here is that if we determined that weapon slot 1 was this boolean as true, or whether it was weapon slot 1 equals false, to determine which slot we're using, we need to put a not boolean on one of these. So to determine that, let's go over to our test map. Let's go into our core, open up B_hero and look at the default weapon slot. So the default weapon slot here is false. So that's weapon slot 1 as far as that slot's concerned. So we need to put the not on weapon slot 1. And if you had yours the other way around, where weapon slot 2 was false, then you would put the not on weapon slot 2 up here. I know it's a little bit confusing because this has kind of flipped them around by having weapon slot 1 up here. So basically, if we're not using that weapon slot, nothing will happen out of false. But if we are using that weapon slot, then when we equip that weapon, it will pop up as true here. And there is a slight overlap, so we'll make some more room. Now another 2 events that we'll need to populate. The first will come over here, custom event. This will be called purchase successful. And we will call that from both of these, purchase successful. You could attach them both to the same if you wanted, or have one separate, up to you, whatever you want to do. I'm going to drag down here. And the other event that we'll need to fire off will come out of true. Let's do another custom event. And this will be replace weapon. So this will be the event for what happens when we need to switch over our weapon slots. And we will call that out of true. So type in replace weapon after creating the custom event. That's when we'll call that event. And we will drag down replace weapon down here. As you can see, we have plenty to do still. So that's pretty much most of the script. So long as we have an empty weapon slot, this would technically work if we were to do it now, except for purchase successful. And obviously, if both our weapon slots are populated, replace weapon isn't fulfilled. So replace weapon is probably the best place for us to start for explaining how this next piece of script has to work. So when we select any of these events, almost the exact same identical script is going to happen, which is the following. If you think about any game you've played recently with a shop with these similar events happening, you get a pop-up telling you, you can't do this. You don't have enough funds, your weapon's already equipped, the purchase was successful, or in this case, this is probably the most complicated menu of the 4, which is replace weapon. So let's go over to the designer. We're going to compile and save, make sure everything's saved up, ready to go. This border we're going to rename to weapons main. With that border, we had a background blur, and then we moved over to a vertical box. Out of that vertical box, we have a few other elements, and we're going to keep most of them. So we can actually copy that over and paste it on top. This little eyeball here, we're going to select that eyeball now for the weapons main here, because we don't want that to show right now. We just want to work on weapons main 1, which we are going to call, pressing F2 to rename, replace weapon border. And we need to call it a border because, as you can see there, it didn't like the fact that there's an event named the same thing. We'll start by changing the title. The title in this rich text block can be replace weapon. And these new buttons can be button replace slot 1 and button replace slot 2. We'll keep this vertical box and this vertical box here in the top of the replace slot 1. We will change that to weapon slot 1. And similarly, the vertical box here, we will change that to weapon slot 2. This second rich text block, we will need to change according to what weapon is in there. So we will tell the player what weapon they have got in that slot before they change it. So for now, we don't want anything in there. In fact, what we'll do is in quotation marks, type in weapon to replace. And because I've got both of them selected, it will change to that. The other thing we'll do as well is move this menu down to the bottom. So I'm going to hit fill on replace weapon title, but then I'm going to change its vertical alignment there with this horizontal box. I'm going to change to fill, but I'm going to change its vertical alignment to there. So there I've just centered this menu by changing the vertical alignment to the bottom on the top and changing to the top on the bottom. So I've just squished it down. You could also put spaces between to fine tune it, but this works for me. Keeps them consistent. So now we have two new buttons to play with. If we come over to the event graph, we can find those buttons here. If we click those buttons in the variables, we can click on onClicked for both of them. With those two buttons, let's drag them over here because the script is going to be quite similar, if not nearly identical. So we'll copy these over and paste them down here. The biggest difference is going to be that we want to change weapon slot 1 next to 1 and 2 next to 2. I could just switch these around, but I'm actually going to change them over like this because I do want weapon slot 1 to be at the top when I can help it, and weapon slot 2 to be on the bottom when I can help it. Don't forget to plug in purchase successful again, because that will be important. Now, as for getting that menu onto screen, we need to create a variable for that. Over to the designer. What we essentially need to do is create a variable attached to this border for visibility. So if I scroll down here, you can see here visibility can be binded to an event, and weapons main can also be attached to an event as well. So what this event over here is going to do is essentially switch them over. Let's start by creating those variables. Click on the plus sign in variables and type in weapons main vis. And in the variable type, we will type in eSlate visibility. We will then duplicate that and call this replace weapon vis. By default, we want weapons main vis to be visible and our replace weapon to be hidden. So compile and save those variables. Then we'll drag over weapon mains, drag over replace weapon vis, holding Alt to get getters, and we will plug that into the event down here, replace weapon. Essentially what we'll do is reverse these. So replace weapon will become visible and weapons main will become hidden. And this is essentially what we're going to do for every single menu. Now we've hit time at the moment, so we'll leave it there for today. But basically all of these events are going to look like a variation of this, with one more event at the end to set focus on that button so that we have gamepad support. So we'll leave it there for now. In the next episode, we'll continue on this, start filling out more of these events, and also fill the script out for our other weapons, perhaps changing this script so that one script will work for every weapon. So I will see you there in the next episode.